exciting couple of weeks here at church. You can see some of us are wearing the scarves, getting dressed up in our outfits. The church has been fully decorated and prepared for a great holiday that's coming, a holiday known as Christmas. There we go. A holiday known as Christmas. And so what a better story to relate to our preparation and our excitement about Christmas than a Christmas carol. And so even if you take a really good look at this story, I know some of you have seen the black and white movie. Some of you have probably seen the colored movie. Some of you have probably seen The Muppets, right? So that's a good one. And then there's a couple of cartoons of Christmas Carol with Scrooge McDuck. There we go, Scrooge McDuck. Lots of different variations to this. And so when we look at this, first, second, or perhaps even the third time you looked at this, you may have thought, oh, this is all about Christmas. But it's not. A Christmas Carol really is not about Christmas. It's a story about conversion. It's a story about redemption. It's a story about transformation. Yes, there is snow and there's decorations and there's holiday parties and there's food and there's singing, and it is at the season of Christmas when this all takes place. And yes, Christmas is eventually the catalyst that changes the main character, but the story of A Christmas Carol really is centered around Ebenezer Scrooge. He's an iconic figure that we've all come to know and love and laugh about. He represents that stinginess and that greed that we know exists in each and every one of us. And he's so iconic that there are times in our own lives when we or friends or loved ones or perhaps even strangers have that mood about them, right? And we call them Scrooge. Scrooge does have one great love in his life, though. Money. Money is the center of everything that he does or thinks. Scrooge is one of those people who lives out Galatians 6:7 to the absolute extreme, which says, you reap what you sow. Well, we can assume that the author, Charles Dickens, didn't give Scrooge the first name Ebenezer for no good reason. The word Ebenezer, which if you caught in your ear, we've already sung this morning. And some of you may have said, what in the world am I lifting up as an Ebenezer? But the Ebenezer actually comes from the Old Testament. It comes from the story of the Israelites and the Philistines we find in the first book of Samuel. This is the part of the story where the Philistines and the Israelites don't get along and they're constantly at war. And the Philistines come into town and they steal something called the Ark of the Covenant. You may remember a couple weeks ago we talked about the Ark of the Covenant, did we? It's the mobile house of God at the time. The Philistines, they trample into town and they steal it during one of the wars. And the Israelites are now without God, at least that's what they think. And so the entire nation falls into absolute chaos and disarray. Until finally, the Israelites turn back to God. They refocus their lives and they center it and they pay sacrifices to God. And when they do that, the Philistines attack once again. They lose, and the Israelites win. And so they celebrate in remembrance of this great victory of winning the war and getting the Ark of the Covenant back. Samuel, he sets up a stone in the middle of town, and he calls the stone Ebenezer. And so Ebenezer becomes a symbol for us to remind us that the Lord has helped us. That the Lord has provided his faithfulness and grace to us. It's a symbol of transformation and redemption. So when you sing out, Come Thy Fount, and you sing up, I lift my Ebenezer, we're lifting up a symbol that reminds us that God redeems us. But first, as this story begins, Ebenezer is a Scrooge. And he has all the same meanings and inferences that we've come to know and love today. No one appreciates being called Scrooge. You know, back in the late 1800s, there was a woman by the name of Hetty Green. And Hetty was the daughter of a whaling tycoon. And When her parents passed away, she inherited $7.5 million. And that was back in 1864, so that was a lot of money. But Hetty was no dummy. I mean, she went right to work with that money, and she went right to work in the business and on Wall Street, and she invested, and she was very smart. In fact, they said she might have been one of the smartest people ever to walk and work on Wall Street. And so Hetty worked many, many years with her $7.5 million. And she broke all the rules of women in business and industry. Except there's only one thing that Hetty is now known for today. And that was her excessively cheap lifestyle. She refused to use heat or hot water. She wore the same black dress every single day. So much so that she got the name of the Witch of Wall Street. Well, when she finally passed away in 1916, she had amassed a wealth of $200 million. And yet the only thing the richest woman in the world was remembered for was that she was Scrooge. You know, Jesus taught many times throughout Scriptures about the difficulty people have when it comes to wealth. Many times people take their wealth and their wealth becomes a god, and it distracts them and it moves them away from the one that they should be serving. In the Gospel of Luke, he says, "No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You can't serve God and money." Recently, a couple weeks ago, we made an analogy about a pane of glass. Do you remember that story? If you look out a window through a clear pane of glass, what do you see? Well, you see other people who are on the other side. But if you look into a mirror, which is simply a pane of glass coated with silver, then all you see is yourself. Silver and money gets in the way. In 1 Timothy chapter 6, it says, "For the love of money is a root of all kinds of other evil." And so this is where our story, the Christmas Carol, begins. It begins with some interesting words with Jacob Marley is dead. Dead as a doornail, it says. That's a very interesting way to start a story, isn't it? Right off with someone is dead. But it's a very critical point to the entire story. We have to understand that Jacob Marley is dead. And he has been dead for about 7 years. And that's the whole reason that the story begins. Because you see, when Jacob Marley visits Scrooge, both men had been spending their whole lives hoarding their wealth and exploiting the poor and others. The only thing is, Marley had died first. And so he has a little more experience than Scrooge. And his experience is to realize the consequences of his life. And so in that first night, when the first bell rings and Jacob Marley comes to visit Scrooge, we see his spirit that is chained together with a money box on his ankle, and we get to see how he's just walking aimlessly around the earth. The picture that comes to Scrooge's mind of his best friend, his longtime friend, now walking aimlessly in pain and suffering. It doesn't seem to bother Scrooge. And so for the rest of the night, Scrooge is visited by 3 more ghosts, the ghost of Christmas past, present, and future. Now, Jacob Marley was dead. And Dickens emphasizes that point. So much so that he says the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, the chief mourner, and even Scrooge himself had signed off on the death certificate. Everybody knew he was dead. But Marley's message was, I'm not only dead now, I am dead before they even laid me in the casket. I was so dead that I was dead even when I was breathing. I was dead when I was alive, because there was no life left in Jacob. And so realizing this, his spirit comes to his friend Scrooge, and he tries to give him the news to avoid such a tragedy and such a horrible fate for him. But Dickens, he lays out Scrooge. He says Scrooge was much colder than Marley. He describes him this way. He says, the cold within him froze his old features. It nipped his pointed nose, and it made his eyes red. His thin lips were blue, and he spoke shrewdly in a grating voice. Sounds like a really nice, warm guy, doesn't he? So, of course, Scrooge doesn't believe Marley at first, and he dismisses the whole idea as some bad beef that maybe he had for dinner. And you all know the story. It continues with 3 more ghosts who take the whole night trying to talk to Scrooge, trying to give him the message that he needed. You know, I don't think it's an accident that Charles Dickens' story here reflects Jesus' teaching on wealth. There are several stories in the Bible where man and wealth and distraction and the loss of hope play out. In the Gospel of Mark, in chapter 10, there's a story of a rich young man. The story goes like this. It says, as he was setting out on a journey, a man ran up and knelt before him and asked him, "Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus said to him, "Why do you call me good? No one is good but God alone. You know the commandments. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness. You shall not defraud. Honor your father and your mother." The young man said to him, "Teacher, I've kept all of these since my youth." Can you hear him puffing himself up? He's an honorable man. Probably looked down upon by his community as an upright citizen. Jesus, looking back at him, loved him and said, "You lack one thing. Go and sell what you own and give the money to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come and follow me." When the young man heard this, he was shocked, and he went away grieving, for he had many possessions. Then Jesus looked around and he said to the disciples, "How hard will it be for those who have wealth to enter the kingdom of God?" You see, both men clearly love money, the rich young man and Scrooge himself. But they both get to this point from 2 different paths, because Scrooge, he operates on greed and taking and not giving. He's egotistical and self-centered. He requires nothing from anyone, and he gives nothing to anyone. But the fine young man in the Gospel of Mark, he's wealthy, he's honorable, he supports charities in his organization. He gives to the poor and helps out the widow and the children. He is a model citizen when it comes to volunteering every day, each and every week. He looks upright, and he hasn't killed anyone or stolen anything. He tries to help everyone he sees. Yet both the rich young man and Scrooge come to the same point. They both lack something. So the rich young man, he runs to Jesus, the gospel tells us, and he kneels at his feet. Scrooge, who wouldn't cross the street for another person no matter what, he waits in his bedroom. But both men receive a message that they both need. Possess your money properly, or it will possess you. And like Jacob Marley says, you better figure it out real quick before it's too late. In many ways, Scrooge and this rich young man, they find themselves in something called a raccoon trap. Does anybody know what a raccoon trap is? In the story Where the Red Fern Grows, the little young boy, he describes the best way to trap a coon. He says you take a small jar and you put a shiny object inside the jar. The raccoon will come along and see the shiny object and put its hand in there and grab it. And it won't let go. All the raccoon has to do is let go of it and pull its hand out. But it can't. It reaches in, it grabs hold of that shiny object, and it won't let go. And the raccoon is trapped. Scrooge is trapped. The rich young man is trapped. And they won't let go. In fact, they are dead set against letting go. So much so that that's how they will meet their death. The two characters come together at different points, but they come together to receive the same valuable message. Now, Jacob Marley, with the love that he had, or perhaps there was some morsel of compassion that he had for his longtime business associate, he comes to Scrooge and he's motivated and he wants to warn his friend, don't end up like me. Change your ways. When Jesus comes to that rich young man, he comes with a clear message as well. Now, when he's coming to this rich young man and they greet one another and they have this exchange, Mark's gospel tells us that Jesus is on a journey. And this happens one day on his journey. Now, you might ask, where is Jesus going? What journey is he on? Well, the journey he's on, he's going to Jerusalem. Jesus is going to a trial. He's going to mockery. He's going to whips. He's going to abuse. He's going to pain, suffering, crucifixion, and death. But before he gets there, Jesus stops with this rich young man and he looks upon the man and he loves him. Soon after, Jesus gives this valuable teaching about wealth and its distraction from God. He moves on. And he tells them that the last shall become first. In the Gospel of Matthew, he says it this way. So those who are last will be first, and those who are first will be last. The human one will be handed over to the chief priests and the legal experts. They will condemn him to death. They will hand him over to the Gentiles to be ridiculed and tortured and crucified, but he will be raised. Death and then resurrection. Transformation and redemption. Jesus is going to be the one dying, and Jesus is going to be the one rising. So that Jesus is our redemption. Jesus is the one who was, who is, and is to come. Jesus is our Christmas past, our Christmas present, and our Christmas future. In the story, as we get to the end, Scrooge awakes in the morning and discovers that he's not dead. And he jumps up with joy because now it is Christmas and the redemption has happened. He realizes that there's still time. Now, I don't know about the rich young man in Mark's gospel. We don't know if he ever woke up from that. We don't know if he ever did go and sell and turn around and follow Jesus. We don't know what we want to know, right? We want to know how the story ended. Don't leave us hanging like that. But Mark doesn't give us the ending that we need. He gives us not the ending we want, but he gives us the ending that we need. Gospel of Mark says we're no better than Scrooge or the rich young man. Rich or poor, we all have our gods that we pay attention to. We all have our riches and our allegiances that distract us from the one who's supposed to be our sole focus. But the good news about redemption is that Christ has come to claim all of those things from us and to set himself first. Some might say that God is very jealous of all the things that you put before him. He's a jealous God. And God believes that no other gods will do for you what he can. No other God will comfort you when you lose a loved one. No other God will show mercy when we are in grief. No other God will crawl into the grave on your behalf and then rise again to redeem you. No other God. No other God but Jesus. And through Jesus, his birth, his death on the cross and his resurrection, he has blessed us more than we can ever possibly imagine. But God has blessed us, every one of us. God has blessed us, everyone. And so this story of A Christmas Carol is absolutely true. It is fact. Scrooge can be redeemed, and so can we.